For many of us, podcasts probably seem like where you get to listen to true crime while you're walking the dog. Podcasts are more than that. They're actually part of a marketing strategy. So I invited Kelsey here because I'm so interested in podcasting as a marketing strategy, and I know that she's doing amazing work in this area. Kelsey, thank you so much for making time to chat with me. How do you see podcasts fitting in as a marketing strategy for small businesses?
I always love storytelling, so any way that people can do it, I'm usually like all hoorah and yay for. Often we fall into this kind of trends era, Erika, and I think right now podcasts are the hot trend where everyone's hearing about them and everyone now thinks they need to implement them. But I will tell you, every year I pick a word of the year, and my word of the year last year was intentionality. This year it was focus. I've combined the two, and I think everybody needs to be intentionally focused on the why, and this is the why of anything that you do. And so I think podcasts can be a value add. I think they can add, if you want to establish expertise in a unique niche, I think podcasts can be great. But I think the downside is that honestly, Eric, I don't hear a lot of people talking about the why in their marketing strategy. Is that we need to do a podcast because, the other group is doing a podcast. They're not looking at like the numbers, who's going to be on, long-term planning and strategy that goes into podcasting. I think the biggest thing with podcasts is you just have to know the why, the goal, and how it's going to hopefully be a value add to your organization. But otherwise, kind of stray away from people just wanting to do it because they think they need to do it because they see everybody else. I'll take us all back to high school. Just because one person was doing something doesn't mean we all needed to do it. Podcasts are both quality and quantity, right? You need quality, but you also need quantity, which means, again, the audience and who you're serving. If you're a small, let's say nonprofit org of 10 people, and maybe, you have 3 comm staff dedicated to this podcast, and maybe you'll have, your CEO often coming on, but you have like 4 listeners every week. Is that a good, is that a good value add, of your time?
Right.
It'd much probably be better, investing in media strategy and trying to obviously, get some of your senior leadership. People have to be really specific about the why of the podcast. So I'll hear some people say, okay, we want to start a podcast because we are lacking, in terms of media, right? Everybody wants media. Media can be hard to get, again, if you're not strategizing in the right way. Because think about how many pitches media companies get. This is something I work with companies a lot on is, the why. Why should they highlight you? It's kind of like now, in addition to podcasts, every org has a what, Erika? A gala. So it's like media companies are getting so many, gala pitches that often are the same thing, right? They're for the community, they're fundraising. What's the why for you? What's the value add to the media company? I think that's the other thing people have to remember. Everything to me has to be a mutually beneficial relationship. And that's what a podcast is. It's a mutually beneficial relationship with your audience. They are going to gain something from it, and that's why they're going to come back to you.
Those are great points. Thank you. So on that note, if you know that you don't have a large audience, is there a strategic value to a podcast outside of sort of that large listenership, or to the point that you just made? No, really, you might as well just spend your time on other endeavors.
I think for me, one of the biggest things I always pride myself in is strategic collaboration, which essentially is a fancy way of saying partnerships. If you don't maybe have the right size audience or value add, is there a way that you can maybe partner with another group, organization, individual who might be leading, a podcast where you could obviously have a direct tie-in. So obviously a lot of times you'll see if they have the kind of same mission and values, vision as an organization. And I have seen this work. I actually used to lead one. We were we had a nonprofit collaborative, and we were able to, it was I think a bunch of about 15 nonprofit groups, and me and another colleague from another organization were able to lead it, and we'd do monthly strategy calls, with the group. And it was a really good value add for all the nonprofits that were part, because they were all small nonprofits and nobody had the budget or time. And so we actually did a podcast that was also a YouTube series.
I love that.
And video, of course, is a whole different medium. That's a whole different conversation. But obviously, right now, vertical video is the hot thing that a lot of people are trying to get into. And so that's kind of the other thing. Do you have time to invest? And you have to look again in a podcast too. To that point, I don't think people forget too. A lot of podcasts now get value add through what we're doing, Erika, being a visual medium, not just audio medium. So I think that's the other thing people, kind of have to think about. So all that to say, I think if you can build an audience some way, shape, or form, do it. But if not, I would go back to growing a key audience, because then I think you'll be able to really see if the bang was worth the buck, essentially.
Maybe a podcast strategy, which we didn't really start to prepare to talk to. Maybe your podcast strategy isn't build your own, it's figuring out what is your message and promoting yourself to other podcasts, as opposed to, because, podcasts, if there are podcasts in your industry, they need to fill that time every single week. I'm sure they receive all sorts of pitches, but maybe that is a better use of time as opposed to sort of growing your own.
Right. One thing we always joke about, in the media landscape, there's always a media relations role. That's always hiring somewhere. It's kind of like a sales job, right? Sales is always hiring, but it's because, again, it's a unique kind of skill set, someone has to be able to have to actively be able to actually get placements in today's media landscape. Especially, we're in a unique media landscape right now, Erika, where, essentially, like, media companies do need to make sure that it's a value add for them, because obviously they have to be able to bring in money, right? We're seeing the shrinking and combinations of media agencies. The click-through rates matter for them as well. You see people have shorter attention spans, and so especially if you're not trying to if you're not trying to pay for media, they have to see how it's going to be a value add to them. And so I would think, is maybe getting on local news, is that going to be more worth a bang for your buck? Again, looking at your vision and mission and maybe what's coming up the pipeline, especially if you have, some of these larger scale events, or would it be worth promoting on a podcast, that you're still trying to kind of grow from the ground up? The most successful podcasts have to be consistent, so if you have maybe a large traveling staff, or, if you have a remote staff, is this something that would work, well for the staff to either come into the office for, could you do it remotely? There's just so many different questions. And so I think it's the biggest thing. Once you get all those questions answered, again, building out that strategy, I'm very big into strategy, Erika. Definitely have how you're going to do it long term, I'd say planned out from the early beginning stages.
Another area that I know both you and I really like to talk about a lot is how to take content and repackage and reuse the same content so that you're basically able to sort of feed the social media monster with taking content. So can you talk whether it's a podcast that you've created for yourself or a podcast that you've appeared on, a little bit about how being a part of a podcast creates continual value through that kind of reuse, recycling.
Yeah, and I hope this is how people look at, a piece of content, because that's for me. So my company, my media communications consulting company, Encryption, this is what we're exactly helping organizations do, Erika. Because, many times I think a lot of people are kind of thinking about that one-off thing. And for us, I always say, do you want to make this a movement or a moment? And for me, I'd much rather say people would rather make it, a movement. And so you get on the podcast or you launch the podcast. What would this look like? So, how can you turn this into obviously social media? So this could be maybe it's in a grid on Instagram, right? With some of the top quotes or quote cards, right? That you can put on social media. Hopefully if you have a newsletter or common email, right? That goes out some type of regular occurrence, how do you highlight a short blurb? Blogs are actually still a big thing for many organizations. So can you turn this into like a blog story?
Absolutely. We're huge on that just because of generative AI, because they really, for generative AI optimization, blogs are so essential.
It's huge. SEO, do not stray away from blogs. And so to that point, please get yourself a strong writer on staff, or obviously bring in a consultant, that's able to do it. And so we've kind of named 3 different ways, right? Email, social media, and social media really expands because social media can be spanned out, over the course of different days. So hopefully it works out editorial calendars, right? Where they're able to kind of plan that out into larger strategy. And then, like I said, the blog. And then I think the other thing is you're thinking even about the next thing that you can do with it. A lot of times a podcast piece can be used as leverage to land media, right? So a lot of times, obviously, when media organizations are trying to book people, they want to hear, what is your expertise? How do you speak? How do you carry yourself? Podcasts, an episode could be a perfect way to be able to lead and launch that. So that's the other thing. How does one opportunity turn into the next media opportunity? And so I think that's the other thing. You can use it as leverage again to gain, hopefully, media from different platforms. And so I think that's the other big thing. So I'd say that's the biggest thing. Don't look at it as like a one-time thing. I think also if you have different campaigns throughout, different months, how are you able to tie that in, right? I know, this month I know we're doing a lot with mental health and mental health awareness. So obviously when Mental Health Awareness Month comes up, if you did a podcast, on that topic, you could do, We still do Throwback Thursdays. It might be a throwback post, that you're sharing on social media. If you see anybody else, talking about it, you can obviously always link to that information for people to be able to go back and listen. So I think that's the other thing. I think people have to think about podcasts as almost timeless pieces. I'm honestly, Erika, like I still get I did podcasts like years ago that I still like people will bring up, or, they'll pop up in my memories, or people will ask me about. And I even sometimes almost forget, because, again, just with the way that media works, with the way search engine works, with the way AI works, like different things come up at different times. And then also think about it, like people follow people too, right? So, a CEO might do a podcast for one org, and maybe he or she's at a different organization later on, and that new org wants to go back and, learn about you. And so they might go back to the podcast, or they might, link to that for people to learn more. So I'd say that's the biggest thing. I think the great thing and beauty of podcasts as a medium, Erika, is that they are, I feel like, timeless and can be turned into so many multiple pieces of content. I've never seen a useless podcast edition, not be able to, basically meaning that I've never seen it not be able to be used or leveraged, into other criteria or pieces, that could be used to, I'll say, advance an organization's mission or strategy.
Yeah, I think you've already said this, but what is the takeaway? What is the takeaway that you want? If nobody listens to anything else that we talked about here, what is the one takeaway that you want people to leave with?
Your why. Like, if you can't pitch your podcast, I always say pitching a podcast is like pitching yourself. You should be able to pitch your podcast in 30 seconds. If you can't do that, I'd say you probably don't know what your podcast is actually meant to be. So maybe go back and re-step the traces. So like for me, the podcast that I have said yes to, or I invested time in, again, the why was there, and we were able to build a value add. But also I've been part of a lot of conversations, Erika, where we've also steered away from it. In life, you got to know when to go. So that might mean for a new opportunity. A lot of times that might be a promotion for people, or sometimes it might be because something's impacting your mental health. Obviously, you have to know when to glow, which means celebrating you and your wins. And that's, I think, when a podcast can be helpful, right? Because that's when you're glowing, right? Things are happening, things are good. You want to showcase that. And then I think a podcast can also go to the growth part, right? Knowing when to grow. If you're trying to grow a company or organization, maybe that's how you do it.
Tell us, if people, once they hear all of your amazing wisdom, they want to get in touch or find you, how can people find you?
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, I love to get in touch. Like I said, I have a communications consulting company that I love to work with people on this type of thing that you're talking about, called Kryption, and that's just KRYPTIANN.com, so Kryption.com. I have a podcast network as well, if people want to check that out. We focus on all things sports and entertainment, and that's listeninwithKNN.com. And I'm super, super excited, again, to just be growing that podcast realm and talking again about just that podcast being able to grow. We've been able to partner with some really great companies and have some really exciting episodes planned for summer. And then if you just want to get in touch with me personally, I'm on social media at @the_real_K Nelson. So thank you again so much, Erika.
And we will, of course, put links to everything in the notes of the video. So thank you to everybody who's listened. My name is Erika Dickstein, and of course you can find us at springinsight.com. We do strategic marketing and creating websites and all of this kind of wonderful stuff. So if you're interested in having a website strategy discussion, let's schedule some time. So thanks, Kelsey.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye, guys.